2025 and beyond is turning out to be an exciting time for indie 3D platformers across the spectrum. From cracked out movement sandboxes to more easygoing adventures in stunning worlds and everywhere in between. It's almost overwhelming in a way. We are now long past the era of the retro revival being the cornerstone of the genre, as it's often not enough to just release an emphatic love letter to Banjo-Kazooie, Sonic Adventure, or Super Mario 64. At times, it can feel as if everything those types of games can offer has already been accomplished, and so a new entry needs that extra wrinkle in order to truly stand out. The sauce, if you will. And that's exactly what drew me to this weird little game called Ruffy in the Riverside. While it certainly demonstrated many of the trappings of the classic collect-a-thon platformers straight out of my youth, with its vibrant cartoon-like world, endearing characters, and an absolute earworm of a main theme, this strange new mechanic allowing players to copy and paste textures from one object to another, augmenting their effects and interactions, was what convinced me I had to try it. What I found after playing was that the swap was the sauce in Ruffy in the Riverside. And I think whether you end up enjoying it for yourself or not is largely going to depend on your inclination towards light puzzle solving over straightforward traditional platforming. Let's take a deeper look. One of the first things I came to understand about Ruffy is that it would be slightly inaccurate to describe it as a collect-a-thon platformer in the traditional sense. After a very brief tutorial demonstrating the swap, the game begins with Ruffy and his little bee friend Pip being summoned by the Mole Knight Sir Edler to investigate a disturbance in Riverside. And while your first objective is to follow him to the beach to excavate some strange, time-shifting marbles, you're given full agency to explore the hub world, one that matches the scale of an expansive, full level that is almost overwhelmingly dense with small tasks to complete. While Ruffy can get around fairly quickly, his moveset is very simple. Combat is almost a non-factor in this game, and aside from a spin attack and ground pound that are rarely required to progress, he doesn't really have any tricky moves to spice up the platforming, lacking the elements of expression and mastery that are becoming pretty trendy in the modern platformer space. It almost feels more like moving around in a modern Zelda game, with a stamina system allowing Ruffy to sprint and glide from atop higher elevation, though climbing is limited to specific contexts. And while there is an additional method of traversal unlocked later in the game that is absolutely a ton of fun to use, you won't be unlocking any new moves like you would in some other games that also begin with a limited moveset. Instead, your ability to explore and interact is entirely dependent on your understanding of the swap mechanic, as well as how far you've progressed in the story. Despite the density of activities in the overworld, I felt the introduction was a tad slower paced than what I may have initially hoped for, as I immediately opted to follow the quest markers and move the story forward. After reaching the beach, the group unintentionally breaks a magical seal on this evil Rubik's Cube of sorts called Groll, who proceeds to wreak havoc on Riverside using the marbles. Obviously, this is the motivating action for the rest of the game, but I'd be lying if I said the manner in which it was delivered wasn't a bit of a drag on the experience. After talking to several NPCs that are seemingly in on the entire lore of this world, it's revealed that in addition to the marbles, there's a magical emblem connected to the world core Groll is trying to destroy. Ruffy then needs to collect the sacred letters to restore the emblem, but in order to do so, must be first recognized as the chosen one in the Basilica of Besties, which additionally needs to be unlocked with the Hands of Hope, until finally, you're able to progress to new areas that are unlocked with each subsequently collected sacred letter. For the sake of the humor and reasons that make a bit more sense thematically after completing the game, this entire section is like almost purposefully annoying, and just a bit too heavy-handed with the exposition for my liking. I got through it in an hour in a game that took me about 8.5 hours to complete the main story. And the dialogue as a whole continues throughout, with Edler and some of the other characters accompanying Ruffy throughout many of the hub-adjacent areas. It helps, though, that the game in general just has such a silly vibe to it, and all the rubber hose reminiscent 2D art is so charming. Like, why do all these bears just constantly snap their fingers? I don't know, but I love it. The characters definitely grew on me over time, but I think the volume of dialogue is worth noting considering I found myself wishing some of the flavor text was served in real time, kind of like Banjo-Kazooie, rather than constantly interrupting the action. In any case, once the introduction wrapped up and Ruffy began to reveal all its cards, I began to feel quite a bit more invested. True to the hook, you're able to swap these textures with a variety of effects. There's not only the different types of materials affecting the weight and properties of objects, like wood creating floating platforms over water, magnets, or even changing a body of water into lava to burn some blocks, but also all kinds of symbols and colors often used to solve more discrete puzzles. And the analogs to Zelda do not stop. Rather than going all in on some truly mind-bending puzzles, what is here is often more about simple pattern recognition and application. Like with these pattern potatoes. Recognizing the solution for these is usually pretty straightforward, as it's quite often literally on a wall nearby. But the challenge comes in the form of rearranging through copy and paste without inadvertently erasing a symbol you might need. The same can be said for these box puzzles with a suspiciously Korok-like reward, and these wall puzzles reminiscent of Super Mario Odyssey. While the solving of riddles needed to unlock portals into the walls can be a bit hit or miss, I found a lot of joy and novelty in swapping the contents of the 2D playing field with materials found in 3D. Not unlike the Koroks and shrines in Breath of the Wild, these instances of puzzles in the overworld are decently fun little distractions whose success kind of rely on their ability to subvert expectations through iteration. But because of their relative simplicity, I think the best use cases of this mechanic are found in examples combining all of their tendencies, most often the case in story missions. Beginning with these buried city puzzles guiding a ball into a hole to unlock a new area, I kind of hesitate to compare these levels to the world design often found in games with a more traditional collect-a-thon structure, because while there are occasionally some collectibles required for 100% completion, these are typically tighter, scripted sequences with more action and complex puzzles exploring the full extent of the swap. The first one is pretty cool, an even more focused and interesting gauntlet of puzzles similar to the overworld, and their appeal generally ramps up over time. They're definitely not perfect and can be susceptible to some unfortunate jank, like this puzzle that requires players to copy an assortment of colors and patterns to some apple trees. You're able to knock the apples off the trees, which are required to solve the puzzle, and they kind of just float away awkwardly. Typically, a puzzle will reset itself when a player walks away, indicated by a little UI element on the bottom of the screen. This didn't seem to happen here, and so having to operate against the in-game logic, unsure of how to progress, I ended up jumping into some toxic goop, which did end up resetting the state of everything, allowing me to solve the puzzle. In spite of that, most of these sequences are pretty fun and entertaining, especially in a meta sort of way, as there's often a theme of cheating the system. One of my favorite examples of this is a hay bale race Ruffy is woefully unequipped to win on his own, thus having to sabotage parts of the track to gain an advantage. I don't want to spoil many more of them because they were easily my favorite segments of the game. It all feels very in line with the humor and somewhat unserious nature of the story at large, even getting you to look at the world in different ways following each little subversion. Rather than unlocking new moves, I was learning more about how the different materials and symbols interact with one another. And so each time I returned to the hub, I found myself engaging with these mechanics on a deeper level in order to uncover more secrets. Even after close to 10 hours of play, it feels like there's still quite a bit more for me to discover in Ruffy and the Riverside. My personal taste didn't always align with what the story was going for, as it took a bit to really settle in. But I was definitely charmed by this world and its characters by its end. For that reason, I think this game will land even harder with a potentially younger audience, finding a comfortable home on the Switch. What really captured me though was this swap mechanic, something that felt fresh while evoking the experimental sandbox essence of some of my favorite games to release in recent memory. It's such a strong proof of concept, I'm excited to jump back in and see what else I missed. But even more so, I think there's so much more that can be accomplished with it beyond what a brand new development studio is capable of in their first commercial release. With a lot of room for both this world and gameplay concept to grow, I'll definitely be keeping an eye on Socrates Labs in the future. And in the meantime, if you're itching for something familiar, yet with a fresh twist for the genre, I'd totally recommend giving Ruffy and the Riverside a look, available right now on all modern platforms. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the developer for providing a copy for review purposes. If you want to see more indie reviews like this, let me know with a like or a subscription, perhaps. And thank you so much to my patrons for their continued support, including Julian Messmer, Questing Refuge, and Blacktooth Bob. I'll see you next time.